Hello, dear friends. Welcome to this latest episode of the podcast series, The Way Out is In. I am Jo Confino, working at the intersection of personal transformation and systems evolution.
And I'm Brother Phap Huu, a Zen Buddhist monk student of Zen Master Taking Hand in the Plum village tradition.
And today, dear listeners, we're going to do what Phap Huu described as getting nerdy. So we are going to be looking at a sutra that is core to Buddhist philosophy, and it's called the 8 Realizations of Great Beings. And Thich Nhat Hanh says this is pretty important, and he says, if we actually study this and put it into practice, we will put an end to countless misunderstandings, difficulties, and progress towards enlightenment, leaving behind the world of birth and death, dwelling forever in peace. So no small promise here, so let's get going.
The way out is in.
Hello, dear listeners. I am Jo Confino.
And I'm Brother Phap Huu.
And today, this is a very special day because who do we have in the house?
Ta-da! Sister!
True Dedication. And we're always trying to get Sister True Dedication to jump into our net and join us. And,
True.
And it's difficult to get her. And the last time she was on, I said to her, Sister, what would encourage you to come back again? And she had a very simple answer. She said, coffee. And as a result of this going out, there have been a number of lay practitioners who've come to Plum Village and in their suitcases, rather than putting clothes in, they've been bringing bales of coffee for Sister True Dedication. Sister, is this true or not true?
It is true. And I received some amazing offerings of coffee both in Vietnam and Asia when we were there in January and then here in Plum Village. And each time it comes with a big smile and a hug from a wonderful listener.
Great.
So thank you very much.
So I know you're not attached to anything, Sister, but if we were to encourage you to come back again, would your answer be the same?
That I would love more coffee?
Yes. So all our 1,000 listeners, I think Sister may end up being a coffee merchant.
I am a bit of a dealer in the monastery. It's true. Sometimes the sisters are moderating the amount of coffee available, but then I whisper to people, just come and find me. I can make you some.
So we all know where to go when we're sort of hungover and we need something to bring us into life. So today, as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about the Sutra on the 8 Realizations of Great Beings. And this was translated by Thich Nhat Hanh. And I'm just going to start off by reading the end bit, because I think this just gives a sense of what might be on offer. And then we're going to sort of ask Sister True Dedication just to give us a sort of context for where all this came from. And then we will, as usual, dive in and get into trouble. So let me just read what Thai said. And Thai means teach in Vietnamese and is how Thich Nhat Hanh is referred to. These 8 realizations are the discoveries of great beings, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, who have practiced diligently the way of understanding and love. They have sailed the Dharmakaya boat to the shore of Nirvana and have then returned to the ordinary world, free of the 5 sensual desires, their minds and hearts directed towards the noble way. Using these 8 realizations, they help all beings recognize the suffering in the world. If disciples of the Buddha recite and meditate on these 8 realizations, they will put an end to countless misunderstandings and difficulties and progress towards enlightenment, leaving behind the world of birth and death, dwelling forever in peace. So, Brother Phap Huu, that's quite some offer there.
Truly is.
So, Sister, see, Phap Huu has a few words today.
Today, I'm here to listen and learn.
Yeah, both of us. When we thought we're doing this as a topic, we thought, Sister True Dedication. We've got to get her in. So, Sister, we're relying on you today to make us look good. So I hope you're on top form. I hope you had a lot of coffee today. So, Sister, to start off with, let's just look at what is the context. I mean, because it's the Sutra of 8 realizations of great beings. Where did this appear from? Was it talked about by the Buddha directly, or is it the result of many teachings?
Very excellent question. So what I think is so important when we're kind of studying things, we want to have a sense of where this emerged from. So this particular text emerged in the Pali canon, so the oldest canon, and then was translated into Chinese in about the year 140, 160 in the Common Era. So this is a text that is, almost 2,000 years old when we're working from these Chinese translations. And this text is interesting because it is one of the first texts to be translated as Buddhism was making its way east. So the text itself is kind of telling a story, like the movement of many texts does. It's telling the story of the emergence of Buddhism along the Silk Road. And we can speak here of the Silk Road across land that went sort of northwest out of India, through Central Asia, and then north through the North Land route into China, so along the North Silk Road. But also, many of these texts were moving along the Maritime Silk Road, so going through the boats, across the seas and up and round to Vietnam, to China, through the oceans. So this particular text, it's extraordinary because the person who was in sort of early China in the year, whether it's somewhere around the year 140, translating this into Chinese from the Pali, that monk was not a Chinese monk. That monk was a monk from what is sort of called the Parthian kingdom, which is modern day Iran and Iraq. The monk that was translating this was born about 30 miles outside of what's today Baghdad, and had himself traveled along the Silk Road to be part of this effort of bringing the wisdom, the insights, the practices and teachings of Buddhism into China. And what's this sort of incredible kingdoms and sort of merchant networks all involved in this great transmission of Buddhism along the Silk Road. And as I was preparing for this morning, it was just extraordinary to discover that at the sort of turn of the Common Era, so like the year 00, in Kabul, there was like 40 temples and monasteries, Buddhist temples and monasteries. So we've got a sense that there in Central Asia, where all the stands are, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Turkmenistan, and of course, Afghanistan and Pakistan, there was a flourishing of Buddhism there in Central Asia. And that is what is traveling along the Silk Road to arrive in China. Like sometimes you might think of Buddhism as a Chinese spiritual tradition, but it had its journey out of India and along both the land and maritime Silk Roads to kind of reach it. And this was one of the very first sutras to be translated into Chinese. And so from that, we know it's a super important sutra.
Wow. Brother, someone's done their homework.
Yes, we have selected the right companion for this podcast. I'm having a huge smile because this is amazing. Just listening to the history of it.
Yeah, thank you, sister. We're very appreciative, actually.
And can I say one more thing about the sutra,
keep going.
Which is just to say, there's always a context to why a particular teaching is given, and this sutra emerged from, legend has it, tradition has it, a question put to the Buddha, which is, we know the monastics, they need to live in harmony with one another, follow the 6 harmonies, practice non-discrimination and absolute generosity. But what about householders? What about normal people? How should they practice? And that is the sort of framing before this sutra then begins. And then this sutra is the response to that question. How do we, as normal people in the world, face suffering, oppression, discrimination, and sort of all the worldliness of the world, everything that's kind of going wrong and is struggling and difficult. And this sutra is the response to that, drawing on the monastic tradition, drawing on the idea of awakened beings or bodhisattvas. How can we draw from that and learn to see how we can respond to the struggles and trials of the reality of life in the world?
Great. And that is very much in the tradition of Plum Village, which is actually, we're not trying to help people to go and live in a monastery up in the mountains, but we're saying actually, how can people live their life in this generation in a way that can help people deal with their suffering and find greater joy? So actually, we should be looking through this sutra rather, with that in mind. What does it mean for everyday life? So anything else, Phap Huu, is anything you want to just chime in with before we sort of dive in?
No.
Great. You see, Phap Huu's being the most Zen-like I've ever known him. So this is wonderful. Let's see if he says a bit more later.
We got a guest today, Jo.
Oh, that's true. Sorry. Okay. So I'm going to start by reading out the first realization, which is the awareness that the world is impermanent. So I'm going to read it. And interestingly, the first line is, political regimes are subject to fall. Things composed of the four elements are empty, containing within them the seeds of suffering. Human beings are composed of five aggregates and are without a separate self. They are always in the process of change, constantly being born and constantly dying. They are empty of self and without a separate existence. The mind is the source of all confusion, and the body the forest of all unwholesome actions. Meditating on this, you can be released from the round of birth and death. So, Brother Phap Huu, to come to you first, should we, because you said let's get a bit nerdy. So how do we approach this, and how do we help some of our listeners may not have heard of some of these terms? So what's the best way to approach this one, do you think?
Well, I think first of all, we can help break down, as we discuss together, each realization. And I think what would be important whenever we read the sutra or we listen to the sutra, we always have to ask, and how can we put it into our daily life? So I think a sutra is not to just be studied one time, but we recite it again and again, because as we progress into the practice, with the practice, our understanding of the Dhamma also develops and grows. For example, we heard the word impermanence. That is a truth that is one of the doors of liberation in Buddhism. So here we can explain and expand and look into, how do we understand impermanence? Do we go through in the day understanding that life is impermanence? And when we look at impermanence, there's so many teachings towards impermanence. There's the 5 remembrance, which we have also reflected a lot and shared a lot in other episodes. But for me, whenever I hear the word impermanence, instead of going towards fear, it is to invite us to see how precious life is and to not take for granted, as well as to see that everything that is manifesting today, and it can bring immense pain and suffering, that we also have to know that everything has the foundation of impermanence. So here, political regimes are subject to fall. Everything that is present, whether it offers happiness, joy, or it offers suffering, we know that it is of the nature of impermanence. And how do we take care of, let's say, a happy feeling that is also subject to fall, that is subject to cease? And we are taught that it is organic. We have to know how to take care of it. We have to know how to feed it. we have to know how to be with it. And if it ceases to exist and we suffer, but then we have the insight that suffering is also impermanent. So as we are going through the teachings of the 8 realizations, we always want to reflect and see, for me at least, I try not to grasp everything at once, because a sutra that we are reciting has so much wisdom in it. And I always want to check in with myself. Now, what is becoming alive for me in this moment when I listen to the words of the Buddha?
Beautiful, thank you. Sister, just coming back to that first line, because I think for a lot of people that would be quite meaningful at the moment, because I think a lot of people are concerned about sort of certain political regimes rising, that we're getting a sort of breakdown in cohesion in society. And there's some people who are very worried about the state of the world and are sort of feeling despair or panic or worry. So to start off by saying political regimes are subject to fall, that's interesting, isn't it? And I remember when the sort of all the suffering and pain and war broke out in the Middle East on October the 7th last year, I went to see Sister Gina, who is one of the sort of more elderly members of the community, and I asked, I said, I'm in deep pain about this. And she said, even this will pass. In other words, at the moment, this is causing immense suffering in the world, but this too shall pass. So do you want to just start off with that? Because I think that's particularly relevant today.
Yeah, thank you, Jo and Brother Phap Huu. I think it's so important for me and so powerful in this sutra. So 2,000 years ago, someone said this, right? And it's so important to be able to identify what are the characteristics of human life and civilization. And those political regimes will come and they will go. And there are those regimes that bring justice and prosperity, and other regimes that can bring greater discrimination and polarization and injustice and harm. There are wars, there are civil wars. There's so much that is sort of part of the tapestry of life. And I find this such a powerful kind of first bold statement of the sutra, which is saying, as a practitioner, we position ourselves like with the broad scope of human history, and we see this on a much, much bigger scale. So it's sort of opening up our mind to not get caught in the signs and symbols. They are real, and as we go on to see, the suffering is real. But we use the contemplation of impermanence to help us emerge from the panic, to help us dig deep into that pain and suffering and despair and fear that may be grounded in real, rational observation. There are people whose lives can be endangered by certain political regimes, whose livelihood can be endangered. And in this case, we sit there, and for us, we read this in the meditation hall. We're all sitting there cross-legged. It's a contemplation. We know this to be the case. And so right away, as we hear this line, can we apply it to the political regimes in the world today, to give ourselves some space, to not feel this is the end of the world. For many of us, we can have that feeling, this is the end of the world and I need to do something. But maybe the something we need to do is a little bit unexpected in the light of the practice. It's not just to rage against the machine and go directly onto the streets. I mean, direct action has its role, but maybe there are other ways that we can position ourselves in relation to impermanence and injustice. And this is such a powerful opening to this sutra. And as Brother Phap Huu was sharing, so this is one of the 3 Dharma seals. And actually what we have in this first realization, we have all 3 of them. So the first is the truth of impermanence. The second is the truth of no self. So humans, we are made of a kind of composite. We're composite. We're made of form, feelings, mental formations, perceptions, consciousness. They are all rivers. We are ever changing. So impermanence across time leads naturally to an understanding that our self is also impermanent. And then the third Dharma seal is that that peace is possible. And that is this final line that we come to here, where we say that when we can meditate on the sort of impermanence of our context, the political regimes, we meditate on our no-self nature, it is possible to touch nirvana and to be released from the round of birth and death. And so we have in this first realization the historical dimension and the ultimate dimension in the final line. So that's what's sort of going on here. We're taking impermanence as the door for us to touch our true nature.
So, brother, help us with, and I think I struggle with this still after many years, and I'm sure many people do, this idea of no self and to be freed from birth and death. And of course, we've said this we've brought this into other podcasts, but I think it's something we keep on having to come back to, especially lay practitioners who maybe don't dwell for great periods of time in these teachings. Can you just bring us back to the basics? When it says no self,
it means you don't exist, Jo.
in your dreams, brother.
Yeah, I think this is a deep insight in Buddhism, and in the podcast or in the Plum Village language, you may have heard of the insight of interbeing, and that is to help us touch the nature of no self. So what it means is, as a human being, we all have a self in the historical dimension. I am Brother Phap Huu, Sister True Dedication is here, Jo, you are here, and many other friends are also here. But when we contemplate and we meditate and we shine the light of mindfulness towards ourselves, we actually start to identify that we cannot be here alone. We have to interbe with all the conditions for us to manifest, for us to be breathing this air, for us to have words to speak, for us to have energy to have action. So looking deeply inside of us, we can be in touch with our parents, our ancestors, the spiritual ancestors, thanks to the wisdoms that have been handed down from generations to generations, to be in touch with the sun, the earth, etc., etc. So the no self element is to help us know that we are not a separate self. So this ideal that we are separate, men or humans are separate, this is an ignorant view in Buddhism. And because of this ignorant view, we have allowed our greed and our desires to overtake us. And therefore, a lot of suffering arises. So this particular self in Buddhism is at the root of the round of birth and death. So whenever I hear and we hear this in sutra, it means samsara. It means the repeating of suffering, the repeating of the chasing, the greed and the desire. So when we talk about non-self in Buddhism, it is to understand that we cannot exist by ourselves. That is non-self in a nutshell.
Thank you, brother. And sister, things composed of the four elements are empty, containing within them the seeds of suffering. What does that mean?
So this is unpacking this idea of impermanence. Here, the four elements traditionally in Buddhism are earth, air, water, and fire. I think if with a more scientific perspective, we could think things are composed of elements, also works here. And this is so important to see that those things we might hold on to as important are also impermanent. So basically in this realization, we're touching both the good news and also the challenge, the good news of impermanence and the challenge of impermanence. So those things that are causing great injustice, hardship, suffering, fear, and despair, they are impermanent. So that can give us some relief when we really look into that in the broad scale of things and a broad scale of time. But also things we cherish are impermanent. The house that we saved up to build, to renovate, to take care of, where will that house be in 2,000 years' time, in 20,000 years' time? We can pour our whole heart into a project. Where will that project be in 10,000 years? And this is an important contemplation because it's one of the sort of unlocking keys in Buddhism. Everything is a formation. It's made of other parts. But we grasp onto and we hold onto these things and we sacrifice our life and our happiness, our present moment and our relationships, chasing after those things, investing in those things. And we lose the wonders of the present moment. And so here we are seeing that political regimes are subject to fall, thank heavens. But unfortunately, so also is your house, your city, everything that you are sort of investing in, your career, all of these things, they're all composed of different elements. They're not something to kind of grasp onto. And furthermore, your own body is also made of elements, is also impermanent. The body of your loved ones is also impermanent. And so this is this first realization is you have to sit with this, you have to hold it at the front of your heart and mind and contemplate it to sort of burn through, like holding a lens to something to really emphasize those, to concentrate those rays of light, to burn through this tendency to always attach to and grasp and tell ourselves stories. So, for example, if we take the contemplation about political regimes, right? So for many of us, despair may arise recently, or fear may arise if there's been an election in our country or in our region that has gone in a direction of more injustice or discrimination or polarization or greed. So that despair, we should not identify with that despair. Like, we shouldn't identify with our fear. What can I do? The external problem, if it doesn't change, then we feel we're trapped in our despair. But what this realization is telling us, your despair is also a river. Your despair doesn't belong to you. You are not defined by your despair. Your despair is just one of the 5 aggregates, one of the 5 elements of your being. You also have your body. You also have other ways, other seeds in you. You have compassion in you. You have love in you. You have generosity in you, which we come to later in other realizations. You have all of this goodness in you, and it helps us not get locked or identified in certain formations, whether they're external to us or internal to us. So this realization is kind of allowing us to ride the waves of suffering in the world and ride the waves of impermanence in ourselves, and to see the good news of that we have a chance to see in our community, in our network of friends and family, in those people with whom we are in solidarity, how can we still practice generosity and service? How can we still act to protect life? How can we still act to protect families and relationships? How can we act to protect people's core freedoms over their body or whatever else it is? So there are actions that are still available to us thanks to impermanence, but also thanks to us being much more than our fear and despair. We can also activate the other seeds that are there.
Thank you, sister. And it's interesting because some of the people I'm coaching at the moment, they're talking about, well, I can't change the global situation at the moment, but I'm going to turn and look at what I can do within my local area, within my region, within my town, within the village I'm living in. That actually we can always take actions, we can always make a difference, but sometimes it's about understanding where we should place our energy rather than despair. Because if you look at the global situation, it can be quite easy to be despairing, but if you look at your local community and what you can do, that can be very empowering.
Absolutely. And then no self then totally becomes the good news, because of the truth of interbeing means that when we act, we can benefit those around us. They are also made of us. We are made of them. What our contribution is real, and we can influence, we can activate things in our consciousness that then activate them in the consciousness of the networks that we're connected to.
Thank you, sister. Brother, you started off by saying this is regularly practiced within Plum Village and practiced over the entire lifetime of a monastic. And I just want to bring in now this question of the accumulation of wisdom, because each of these realizations by themselves is like, oh, we're asking people to let go of the idea of a self. We're asking people to go beyond life and death. We're asking people to see the impermanence of life. Is it necessarily going to be the case? And I suspect, yes, well, it definitely is for me, that this takes time, that someone who is practicing or wants to sort of develop their wisdom should not expect like, all right, okay, got it. Because it's very easy to get lost in an intellectual understanding. And I sometimes do this. I think I intellectually understand something, but I'm not sure if I've actually integrated into my life.
I think each and every one of us will have we call it a ripening, a different ripening of understanding with the practice and the sutras, the teachings from the Buddha and our teacher. But, for me recently, I don't only meditate on the impermanent of things that are not going well, because that's an, of course, practice in like what Sister True Dedication shared, but I'm also practicing it to something that, for example, Plum Village is also of the nature of impermanence. And we're sitting in his hut right now, and we have this beautiful view of the forest just in front of me. And I remember one time sitting drinking tea with Tai, and he said, "Phap Huu, this view here, do you think in 100 years it will still be like this? Or will it all be supermarkets and a new city that is developed? And will Plum Village still be here?" And listening to our discussion, and I just realized that, especially now, like a lot of us, we are in this phase of strengthening our community and learning to step up and be the legacy that our teacher have given to us. And present moment, I'm very happy, and I don't want to be attached to that happiness also. And I'm also really practicing interbeing of action right now, because I know these actions that I am contributing by my body, my speech, my thinking has an impact and will be an ingredient for the future. For me, like recently, like every time I come into meetings with my brothers and sisters, and I see that what we are doing is not just for us alone. It's for many generations down the line. And what gets me up and what gets me to continue to be like motivated is that what we are doing is developing and is nurturing this continued spiritual tradition that we have received. So for me, it doesn't just exist intellectually, but it really becomes really alive, and that our actions really have impact, because we represent not only ourselves, but we represent the three jewels in Buddhism, that is the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, which represents each and every one of us that practice. We carry the awakened nature, which is the Buddha. We are speaking words that can contribute to understanding and love, that is Dhamma. And Sangha is community, and individual makes a community. So each and every one of us, we are of this interbeing thread of this community. And for me, I continuously am reminded of like why mindful actions are so important, because they do contribute to the beauty that is also a part of this world. And so for me, when I hear all political regimes are subject to fall, also everything that is beautiful, like what we've heard, is also has a nature of impermanence. But we can also keep nurturing and seeing that we are constantly being born and constantly dying. Here, that is actually beauty, because in Plum Village in 50 years should be very different than now, right? Like, I think one of our responsibility is to continue to evolve the tradition. So right now, like, we're all wearing Vietnamese robes. And I remember one time, like, our teacher said, one day I expect our robes to change, because it's a part of the cycle of birth and death. Birth and death here, there's an opportunity. When something ceases to exist, something new has an opportunity to exist. So in this contemplation, it really is like a deep meditation. And recently, this has been very close to me because it means it's a true dedication. We're in a lot of meetings together looking at the growing, developing, sustaining, and joy and suffering of a sangha. And honestly, sometimes it's long and hard, like attention and thinking and holding the space together. But I know that what we are doing is not for us alone, and it has interbeing in it, So for me, that's very practical how I am applying these this first realization into practice right away. And the 5 aggregates of our perceptions, our consciousness, all of these are continuing to change, and they are not of a separate self.
Sister, the next bit. The mind is the source of all confusion, and the body the forest of all unwholesome actions. Help us. What is that? How is it useful to know this?
So I think what this line is saying, mind is the source of confusion, the body the source of kind of unwholesomeness, is an interesting declaration on the nature of Homo sapiens. We're saying here that our mind organ, our mind consciousness, is not a kind of abstractly reliable thing. It is not something that is experiencing the world in a super clear way. It is something that needs to be trained. It's something that needs to be cultivated. In Buddhism, we always have this line, the mind is a field to be cultivated. There are seeds, and we have to take care of the ones that come up as weeds and the ones that will come up as good things that can nourish us. So the mind here, the source of confusion, to not trust the mind too much, to know that the mind left uncultivated will lead to wildness, will lead to all sorts of things we'll come to in the later parts of the sutra. The greed, the desire, the craving, the exploitation that lead to harm, to injustice, and to suffering. So this is saying, be careful your mind. It's the source of confusion. Be careful your body. It is the source of unwholesomeness. So it's not exactly that our mind and body are two separate things. Disclaimer here. But when we come to the sort of bodily aspect of our consciousness, if you like, of course our body has craving. We want food, we want comfort, we want sensual pleasures. Our body is wired for that, right? And our body needs to learn a certain moderation. Our body needs guidance, to take care of our body with exercise, to take care of our body with healthy foods, to not always follow our impulses. And we've also explored that in previous episodes of the podcast. Impulses can come, but we have a chance to be free from them. We have a chance to be the master of them. We can master our body. We can take care of it. We can master our mind. We can take care of it. And so this line is just saying, it's just a little line of warning here. Folks, that no self nature you found that you might think, oh, no self is bliss. I'm just made of everything. That means I'm one with everything. That means everything's fine. It's like, hang on a minute. You are the guardian of this mind. You better take care of it. And you are the guardian of this body. You better be careful how you handle all those impulses, because left unhandled, they lead to all of this impulsive, short-sighted behavior, which is the root of suffering and injustice in the world. So both our body and mind, there's something for us to take care of.
Great. And sister, before we move on to the next one, just in relationship to what you just said, how, for someone who may be starting out on this practice, for someone, or even a more seasoned practitioner, I mean, this is a lifetime of study. I mean, there are people, and we've discussed this before, Phap Huu, that some people come to Plum Village expecting or hoping for in their 1 week here to sort of get all this, understand it, and leave sort of not necessarily enlightened, but definitely happier and with a sense they've got the tools in their toolbox to go and sort of change their lives for the better. But this is slow, heavy going sometimes, sister. I mean, this can take years. So I'm just wondering, just from your own personal experience, because as Phap Huu said, everyone will have their own experience. How has this process been through your life?
Oh, good question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Well, I think I believed my mind too much before. I benefited from a good education and had great teachers. And I thought, oh yeah, my mind. And I just believed it all the time. And I believed my opinions. I believed my feelings. I believed my despair. I believed my frustration, my anger, my sense of kind of righteous injustice. I believed it all the time. And it sent me into an absolute pit in the end. And then I was afraid of my mind because I thought I can't possibly confront these hidden depths of it. So I think for me, something that unlocked when I began to encounter this practice was simply this question: are you sure? Like I had some space around my thoughts and what I would tell myself. And I realized that my thoughts are not something I need to believe. They've just emerged through mental processes. It doesn't mean they're right. It doesn't mean they're going to help me. It doesn't mean they're going to take me in a good direction. So I think having some space just to say, are you sure? The mind is an organ. It's an uncultivated organ until we get really familiar with it and learn how to take care of it with a lot of compassion and understanding. So that's on the mind part. And I think the body part also, of course, we're driven by impulses. And I think I come from quite an impulsive family. In certain ways, I think I probably have a natural tendency to addictive behaviors. I think I have a tendency to want to fight to get what I think I need or want, and that is coming from my human nature and my relation to my kind of inner impulses. If I get this, I'll feel okay. If I get this, I'll feel safe. All of these things. So what I've come to understand is it's been a really subtle journey for me. And I can't remember if we've spoken about it before yet, but for me, it was always in relation to food. So I'm somebody who had dysfunctional food behaviors for a good 10 years or so. And that kind of disordered eating is coming from my inability to handle the impulses that were coming from my body that ultimately I was repressing and ignoring and not listening to and mixing up with my feelings and so on. So for me, the journey of understanding my body came through: how can I feel I have an appetite? How can I handle just craving for sugar or craving for crunchiness? I love chips.
and that's, she's not saying
I'm not saying, no, please do not give me more
don't
chips.
Bring crisps.
No crisps.
We have to do a disclaimer every time you say that.
But it's just, and I think, okay, yeah, maybe, coffee is one of these cravings that I do indulge or whatever. But for many of us, I mean, it starts in these really basic things like around our food habits. Because our food habits then lead to how we feel about our body. They lead to how we're handling our energy through the arc of the day, how we are, giving ourselves the nutriments that we need to feel well in our skin. So for me, these were two sort of initial doors with the body and with the mind. And for each one of us, it'll be different. And then from there, we then can start to, of course, fascinating thing about monastic life, because we're celibate, right? So then what are those inner impulses for physical affection? Then as in my years of being a novice, then it was like, how can I become aware of that? I just want a hug from someone, who will I have a hug from? But also, will the hug make me feel better? So then, and this for all of us who are dealing with loneliness or other things, these are real impulses. They're coming from the body. And we can think that they're noble. We can think, I'm a human that needs a hug. And then when we have self-pity, I'm a lonely person in need of a hug, right? But then it's like, oh, well, I'm a Homo sapiens. We're a mammal. We need human touch. So then it's like we bring wisdom to our body that has an impulse. And we say, okay. And, I mean, literally, it's only since being a nun, Jo, that I've actually been someone who strokes my chest, who hugs myself, who puts my hand on my brow. So, but also, of course, in the sisterhood, there's a certain intimacy. And of course, there are lots of sisters I can ask for a hug. And whenever my mum is here, one hug in the morning, one hug in the evening, I'm like, Mum, I need this. I got to store up. So we've got to be able to see these things and to meet them with insight and love so that we transform them, because sometimes that need coming from the body, a need for physical affection, it can take us down all sorts of pathways that are ultimately into either self-pity or unwholesome craving or like neediness around people, and we project it on others to supply those things. So as you can see, the path is kind of infinite. But these 8 realizations, they are distilling just some really core foundational principles. And here in this first one, we're realizing, are you sure about the mind? Are you sure about the body? Whatever is arising there, approach with caution, approach with vigilance, approach with insight and love, and then let's see where we go from there. In these lines in the Chinese, it's so powerful because each line is just 4 characters. Boom, 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 boom. So they're real declarations of wisdom. And here we have these lines. The mind is the source of all confusion. The body, the forest of all kind of unwholesome action. And here it's not to say, oh, all bodies are impure. Bodies are bodies, but it's just to say what arising from our body can take us in the path of goodness, in the path of service of all beings, in the path of stability, balance, insight, compassion, all these good things. How can we take care of our body to lead us there?
Wow. Sister, thank you for that sharing. I'm going to take a breath. Right. Well, that is the foundation. And now let's go to the second realization, which I will read. So the second realization is the awareness that more desire brings more suffering. So let's read it. All hardships in daily life arise from greed and desire. Those with little desire and ambition are able to relax their body and mind free from entanglement. So, Brother Phap Huu, let's start here, because I know that when I grew up, I was trained to succeed and to do more and to be more successful and to earn more money and to have more things. And it was very much on the basis that actually my happiness lay in more and more and more. And of course, we see, that one of the problems with society, our extractive economy in the West, is that it's built on ever increasing, even when we haven't got the resources to support that. So tell us a bit. Those with little desire and ambition are able to relax their body and mind free from entanglement.
That is so ideal.
If only.
We have to remember that in a lot of the sutra, the context of it speaks directly towards suffering. So that's very important, because I feel that what is being represented in this second realization is the mind of running after desire that doesn't allow us to be who we are. So we have teachings that our teacher have given us: be beautiful, be yourself. But in today's world, I don't want to be myself. I'm chasing after a different image. So in our understanding, in the context and the teachings of Buddhism, the desire, Sister True already mentioned it in the first realization, that we all have to really be mindful and have a practice towards our sensual desire. So sensual desire is definitely a source of energy that pulls us into many directions, leading to addiction, leading to losing ourselves and not being able to have a connection with ourselves, whether it is physical contact, whether it is sex, whether it is indulging ourselves with images, with drugs, with a kind of substance to numb ourselves even, or to fall into a different kind of feeling, a high, and so on. So all of these sensual desire doesn't allow us to touch the present moment. So it takes us away from the ability to be in touch with our being, be in touch with what we have in the present moment. And the second desire is it touches the desire that we want to be something else. We don't have the ability to embrace our own history. We don't have the wisdom of seeing the beauty inside of us. Because especially today in our times of screens and our time of doom scrolling, which I have publicly shared, I am a victim of it too. It's such an easy place to just take refuge in. It's like, because when I see suffering in myself, I want to look for happiness outside of me. And that maybe at the beginning, maybe you even I have created this perception like, oh, let me look at something that I can then work towards, but then that becomes a hook in itself. So the desires are all baits for us that can drag us away. And the desire of not having the capacity to see the beauty inside of us, it's actually very common today. And we have a lot of teenagers that come through the monastery during the summer. And sometimes I always ask them, do you feel like you're being pressured to be someone else? And they always say, yes, brother. Because not a lot of times people teach you to be yourself. They're always teaching you to be something else. And that kind of education and that kind of culture of thinking is so rooted in our modern ways without us even knowing. So we have to be very attentive and very mindful, especially now as a monastic. When I first ordained, I was only 14 years old, and there was a big question in the community is like, do we send these young teenage monks and nuns to school? Which we would then go to a local school about 20 minutes away from here. And there was a lot of discussion around it because it was the first time the community had all these teenagers in the monastic world in Plum Village. And fortunately, I still so grateful to Tai. He said, absolutely not. Because if they go there to school, 5 hours a day, 6 hours a day, then their environment, their conditions around them will not make them monks and nuns anymore. They will be living within the world of desire. And especially outside of the monastery, and we are so young, we'll be hooked. I know for sure I wouldn't have been able to survive because I know I'm so conditioned by the environment around me. And because when I am still a young practitioner, my mind is not yet tamed and doesn't have the insight of, don't do that, don't go down that path. But it is easily attracted by debates. And I know this for a fact because I was very addicted to gaming when I was growing up. I would go to the temple with my mom and I can't wait to go home just play games. And every time, every day, that was my routine after school, right? It's like, what do you do with your free time? It's just gaming. So I know that there is a deep desire of getting all of these particular stimulation. And, when you win a game, there's no prize, but you just feel like there's a victory. So that desire to have a kind of feeling is also very rooted in our nature of being human. And so it's to recognize there is that desire. And the third desire is to eliminate self, and eliminate others. Whatever we don't like, get rid of it. So that is in our view, that's wrong view. So we think even suffering and happiness, we want to get rid of suffering. Like you said, Joe, like people come here and they want to be enlightened after a week, or they want to be happier, and that's a desire. That's a desire, and if we shine the light towards that, we can actually look. Well, there's also an aspiration there, is to relieve our suffering. And I've heard our teacher also made very strong statement is, yes, you can be happy. But do you have the insight that you have joy and happiness that are present? You just don't see it. Like if you take a breath and you allow that breath to truly ground your mind to your body, and you can just be in touch with your breathing, you can calm your whole nervous system. You can feel alive. You can feel that you are not alone. You are a stream of continuation from your ancestors, from your society. Like you are just not a separate self. So you can touch something very deeply, and Tai would say that is an enlightenment right there. And there's a lot of enlightenment. There's a lot of moments of realizations that we are just not opening our eyes, and we're not allowing ourselves to touch because we are being dragged and pulled by this desire. So when I speak about this hardship here, it talks about this hardship to run after fame, power, money, wealth, because we think that is the ultimate destination in life. And I had that. I had those goals when I was really young. But it doesn't mean that we do a lot. And there's a lot of service that we are able to offer in life. And that can be looked at a kind of hardship, a kind of like, because the happiness that I have and the peace that I've been able to touch, I don't want to be selfish. I want to be able to share these teachings. I want to be able to create this refuge of what we call our spiritual home for so many other people to come and experience. And that all takes work. But when the desire becomes an aspiration, that becomes a very different energy. And our teacher was very aligned by always asking us, what is our deepest desire to the monastics? It's like, okay, now you're all monks and nuns, but what is your deepest desire in life as a monk and a nun? Because you can also lose your practice in your monastic life very easily if there is no deeper desire to have impact of change, of compassion, of love, and of transformation.
Beautiful. Thank you, brother. Sister True Dedication, I just want to pick up on the word ambition. Those with little desire and little ambition are able to relax. So I just want to talk about ambition because in Western culture, in my life, ambition was always the most positive thing. You know, it's like, what's your ambition in life? What do you want to succeed in? And what Brother Phap Huu has just done is given that sort of sense that it's not having no ambition at all, but it's the type of ambition you have as well, isn't it? Because I remember I interviewed Tai about the capitalist system. I said, Tai, isn't the problem that we want endless growth? We just want things to grow. And he said, well, there's also good growth. He said, I want the monastery to grow. I want the teachings to grow in the world. So he said, don't judge growth, but he said it's the type of growth that we have. So I just wanted to look, and Phap Huu is also sort of discussing, because he says the greatest desire of being a monastic. So that is a desire, but it's a desire heading towards a goal that's not personal. How do we start to see ambition? How would we know when we're doing something because we want to do it for ourselves and we want to sort of have greater fame, or actually whether the ambition is in service to life. It's quite hard sometimes to be able to separate those out or to untangle them.
So in the monastery, I think we all have our individual aspirations or desires or whatever, and then we have our collective aspirations as a community. And Tai always said that part of our mission, and he said this many times and it really struck me, is to take the Sangha's career as our own. So that I found really interesting, and that's been then my mission, to take the Sangha's career as my own. So I don't have like separate dreams from the Sangha's dream. But I can see each one of us still has the opportunity, because of the diversity of our community and the creativity of the community. We color the Sangha's dream with our own dreams, right? So I think the answer is that this is a kind of work in progress. And I'd say that, like, really for me personally, there's a real sort of tension here, because I read this line and I'm sure all of you in this room are laughing at me. Those with little desire and ambition are able to relax their body and mind free from entanglement.
I know, sister, your dream.
My dream. And I'll never forget that when Brother Spirit and I left the little French village where we were living before we came to ordain, one of his aunts, we shared our bold vision of why we wanted to become monastic, because we had to try and convince everyone that it was a good idea, because we wanted their support, but like obviously not everyone felt able to support. And she was so astute and sharp, and suddenly she said, well, that sounds a lot like ambition to me. What's Buddhist about that? It's like, oh, we're going to save the world, but she just really cut us down to size, which is why aunts and grandmothers are very, very important to make sure that we're on the right path. And I've never forgotten that. And it often sort of haunts me. It's like I have large, big visions and dreams for the community because I kind of see what's possible. And I was just in so many of those moments and conversations with our teacher when he was imagining what's possible. And then as one of the doers in the community, then it becomes like my marching orders, if you see what I mean. Like, now I need to realize this thing. And I think for many of us, because there'll be people listening, and we all have our dreams, right? And then they start super noble. I would love to build this school. I would love to create this community garden. I would love to run this project. I would love to join this organization. And these things start from super pure, noble intentions. And then before we know it, we set all our measurable targets of success. Only when we have whatever your measurable targets, this many people or this many things, or that we launch this or realize that or complete this. And what started as a really pure intention gets kind of corrupted by the world. And this is exactly what this sutra is really, really, really talking about, which is, how do we have right desire? How do we keep it on the right track in a world that's full of wrong desire and not being on the right track, in a world that is also eating us up, and in systems and organizations that exploit our right desire and then make it into something, people kind of speak in the language, as you were saying, Jo, of success or of, what achievement looks like, or even status. And we come to that in the later ones. So it's how to have a relationship to this energy of aspiration and desire. So basically what our teacher was saying is there's wholesome aspiration and intention, and then this sort of unwholesome ambition. And that's what I mean, like there's a kind of dance for each one of us. When are we crossing that line? And before we know it, like sometimes inadvertently, we say, like, oh, this has become an ambition. We set ourselves a mission, like, okay, very super concretely for us, we would love to create some new Dharma courses next year. Okay, this is not as easy as you think. This is thousands of hours of work from dozens of people. And we were trying to set a mission. Are we going to try and make 1, 2, or 3 new courses? Brother Spirit says 1. Brother Phap Huu says 2. And
Sister True Dedication says 7.
Exactly. So this is a bit of our problem. But that's why community is so important. Because they're like, calm down, sister. Let's just, And so then it's kind of like, why did I say that? Why did I put that as my measure of success? Like, actually, the measure of success is the community in harmony? Is the community nourished? Is the community feeling creative? Is the community feeling spacious, able to relax, calm, free from entanglement as we make these new courses? Like, this is a really real thing. And so how do we navigate that? But if we don't have some of us driving change in the community, if we all just sat back on our laurels and said that we will just enjoy the land of Plum Village for ourselves, and whoever manages to make it here can come and enjoy it with us, that would also not be right practice, because we're not being pulled forward by a spirit of service. And so these 8 realizations, so when it says 8 realizations of great beings, this in the Northern School of Buddhism, in Mahayana Buddhism, great beings are bodhisattvas. We make the vow to be of service to all beings. So even as monastic, even living our simple life, we still have that vow of service. So while being here in the monastery, in this beautiful environment, in this wonderfully nourishing community, how can we help that be of service to all beings and available to all people? And so to not sort of rest on our laurels here. So we're often in this balance, just how we set our program for the next year. How many retreats can we receive? How many thousands of people can we receive? And how to not kind of, sorry, graphic language, not sacrifice the community on the altar of our shared ambition. We'd love to receive this many people. And then that's a huge amount of work and labor for us in the sort of hospitality and teaching and organizational side. So for each one of us, I think it's to know that ambition can kind of creep up on us, and that, but with collective insight, with good friends around us, our colleagues, our friends, our family members, like to help us challenge ourselves, but also not become a victim of our striving for success.
Thank you, sister. And what's coming to my mind as you're talking is also because often it's Phap Huu and I talking, 2 men, and I'd like to bring in gender here, because often women can have the experience that they are having to do it all, and that often men are sort of, they're not sort of necessarily so committed, or they're more chilled out, or that women are often having to take on a greater role of, and we see this in everyday, in work, that women are often having to work and then go home and be expected to take on sort of all the quote unquote domestic sort of responsibilities. How do you start to work on this around ambition and around calm and relax when there's a gender, when things have to get done, and there's this sort of inbuilt notion within society that that's the woman's responsibility, or the woman herself may be feeling that's her responsibility. How important is gender within modern society around this?
Well, thank you for saying gender, and it may not be as binary as you portrayed, and also it may be operating in such complex ways, because the gendering can be in the cultures in which we find ourselves, like cultures multiple, whether organizational, national, or kind of affinity circles, or whatever context we find ourselves in, gender shows up in different ways, right? And I think there's a lot to be said, if you'd like me to speak about this kind of key word, I guess, of desire, ambition, relaxing, body and mind free. Like something I noticed, I'll speak first of all about Plum Village to not kind of project gender norms on others, but something I do notice among the sisters is we find it very hard on lazy moments to be visibly doing nothing. And I think this comes from women's cultures throughout the centuries, that part of our contribution to the labor of human life has been not to be idle. And we come to that as what is kind of right action later in this sutra as well. But it's Here it's how many of the women listening, or those who identify as women who are listening, how many of us feel that in any given day or week, we have the right to do nothing, to sit, to relax, to rest our body and mind, free from entanglement. And I think that would be the answer to that question would be gendered. I think that people would have a very different experience. And sometimes it's been very powerful for me to understand this thing about mental load, that often who carries the mental load in a household or in a professional team, the mental load and the complexity of thinking and organization and timeframes is often handled by women. When I was at the BBC, the producers were the absolute heart of the organization and had a great, there was a lot of pride and deep understanding among the producers. And of course, I guess I don't know if that's changed, but when I was there 20 years ago, 80% of the producers were all women, because that's a particular talent of the female brain. But it's carrying that mental load can become an obstacle in our meditation practice, because we are solving so many complex problems in our domestic life, family life, home life, shared home, wherever we're living, and that we may not give ourselves permission to sit truly in silence. And so then when we have this rains retreat, we are 50 nuns, and typically each week 50 women or non-binary folks here in our hamlet. And when we sit together to do nothing for 45 minutes in silence in the meditation hall, I feel it's such a revolution for women that we're doing that we're really making an art of that. But where I think there's still more progress is, can we do nothing on the lazy day? The other lazy day, there was a sister building benches. There are sisters knitting socks, hats, things all the time. The sisters are extremely talented seamstresses and artists and musicians. Like, everyone's in actually quite active. Whereas I think the I don't know, maybe Brother Phap Huu can share. I don't know if the monks have more ease to delight in doing nothing. I think that may be a gendered thing here. And what I think also, I would just, one more sort of refined point on the gendering of this is that as women, we also have the right to have ambition for ourselves, for our children, for our gender, for like the rights of women that we might want to fight for or defend or protect, or equality in like so many areas. And I wouldn't want this line, those with little desire and ambition can relax body and mind free from entanglement. I wouldn't want that line to be interpreted as meaning we sit back and don't do anything, or see that it's telling us to not have ambition for more rights, more justice, more equality, or simply to say I can be a successful artist as a woman, I can be a successful writer, I can be a successful whatever it is. We have that right in whatever gender we choose to show up in. You know, it's not just for men to dominate in these fields. And so I think that's super, super important here, because of course that word ambition is normally associated with like the male force. I often make a joke that some of the best ideas in our fourfold community, you know, the men have a short burst of enthusiasm, and then the women and nuns are left carrying the baby. Like, this is like, you know, it's kind of, how do we work in teams together? But also how to recognize the diversity of human experience, the diversity of gendered culture, and how to allow ourselves to play to our strengths. And working in mixed teams, as we always do here in the monastery, we're working with lay and monastic teams, all genders. And how can everyone play to their strengths, but also how can we share the labor equally? How can we acknowledge the different roles that are needed for the work and so on?
Thank you, sister. So let's go on to the third realization. And what I'm realizing as we go into this is, of course, what Tai always says is that in one teaching are all the teaching. So I think as we go through this, what we're going to be doing is coming back sometimes to the same type of topic, but we're building on it as we go along. So let's go on to number 3. The third realization is the awareness that the human mind is always searching outside itself and never feels fulfilled. So here we go. This brings about unwholesome activity. Bodhisattvas, on the other hand, know the value of having few desires. They live simply and peacefully, so they can devote themselves to practicing the way. They regard the realization of perfect understanding to be their only career. So, Brother Phap Huu, you're very lucky because being a monk, it is your only career. But let's go on to this. The human mind is always searching outside itself and never feels fulfilled. Let's start off with there because it's so true of, especially in these days, in modern civilization, with our senses, we're always picking up what's going on outside, but often not listening at all to actually what's going on inside.
Yes, and I think that brings out the energy of restlessness as well as craving. And because we don't have the ability to feel whole, and feeling whole, feeling at ease with oneself, then brings the desire to search and to get busy. And I think for myself, like when Sister True Dedication was speaking on the realization that it's so revolutionary for women and those who identify as women to sit and do nothing. And a part of my journey as becoming at ease with a Vietnamese in the West, like my parents, like my mother and my father also worked 2 jobs when they first arrived in Canada. And they were always busy. So the idea of being busy is how to survive in life. And I remember that, I had a lot of judgment in the community because I consider myself a very hard worker and I like labor. Like I used to do all the grass cutting when I started as a novice, and then I was in the kitchen. I even like twisted my ankle on crutches. I promise you, Joe.
Possible?
On crutches, and my mind doesn't allow me to stop. I would still show up at the kitchen, sitting on these high chairs and be cutting vegetables for my cooking team, because that has been like ingrained in me to always to be active, to do. And a part of it has served its wonderful purpose, because I've discovered in community one of the most crucial way of communication is actually service. It's like when you're in service of, there is true communication, because that is part of the thread of becoming a member of this community. Because we don't have a salary here. We get for 40 something years in Plum Village, we had 40 euros a month as our pocket money. After 42 years, we increased it to 80 euros because of inflation, because we can't afford shaving creams and like some more coffee and some more cookies, snacks for our rooms from time to time, and just a little boost of pocket money. But that's not the purpose of why we are here, right? There's a purpose of to be of service to the world as well as to our own self. So I remember like part of my practice in knowing that I am enough has been one of the most vulnerable journey ever, because the ambition, the desire, the concepts of safety was still very ingrained in me. About the security was having enough wealth. That and that still is a part of my transformation today, right? But the part of the practice is knowing that view that I have received is not the ultimate goal. And realizing that on the path with a desire or with an aspiration, the happiness is not when we arrive at the goal, of the desire or the aspiration. But every moment, the process can bring so much joy. Like when we know that to slow down and to look at ourselves in this process of service, you can learn so much more from the present moment than from the goal itself. Like part of my own measuring and reflecting and seeing where I'm at is always looking in relation to service, in relation to in being with community. It's like how I relate to a conversation 10 years ago and now is very different. And yesterday we did a workshop in one of our online courses on deep listening and loving speech, so on communication. And one of my realization was every time I used to go to a conversation, I'm going with the idea of who's right and who's wrong. And how can I be louder or how can I be more skillful so I'm right and they adopt my views? And I realized that part of the intention that brings suffering because that is to dominate. But our core practice of deep listening and loving speech is to understand, is to build a connection. So, oh, you have this view? Where does it come from? Can you share more? Right? Instead of, nope, that's wrong, da 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 da. And this this practice and this way of living in community have really expanded my horizons of learning to be deeply in the present moment, and meaning that like I honestly have meditated on my death, and I know that if I am living deeply now, even though like Sister True Dedication, like I have a lot of dreams too, like dreams for the community, dreams for myself in the community. But I don't feel that if I don't accomplish these dreams, they don't reduce my happiness. Because I do realize I am living the dream that I didn't even have before, honestly. I never knew I would be a monk in my life. But being in the present moment, though, I can be swept away and carried away by the wonders I have, by the conditions that I have now. And so this realization of the bodhisattvas is knowing and living simply and peacefully. I think simply here is a simple mind, learning to detach ourselves from the idea of success and the idea of winning in life. So having this conversation with all three of us here, that is a win, right? Like, I mean, we had this really quick break and you just said, Sister True Dedication, we love listening to you. That's a win. For me, that is a win. That is like recognizing that it doesn't matter who benefits from this podcast, honestly, but I benefit from communicating, from listening to you, Jo, and to you, sister. That already is a win. And so many times that we are constructed to know how many people will listen to this, how many people will, right, this idea of success, like what rating are we? And we're always somewhere number 2, right, Jo?
We're always number 2.
We're always
Perfect
number 2.
place, just
2,
behind
number 3,
the
number 4.
leaders.
and we can be happy about that, right? So this realization, the simplicity in life is to deconstruct ourselves from the value that society had put. So our teacher always challenged us, and it still is a challenge, like on lazy day, can you enjoy a cup of tea? Or can you enjoy a cup of coffee? Can you enjoy togetherness and having no plan for that day?
Thank you, brother. And it's a reminder, we never started this podcast with an ambition. We started it because we wanted to start it. It wasn't like it will only be successful if this or if that. It was just saying, actually, we're doing it for the love of it. And I find that when we do something for the love of it, it has far more impact than if we do it to achieve a particular aim, because then we're always looking to achieve the aim. And we often forget even the purpose that was behind it. But it's always stayed true. We never look at anything. I've never listened to another Buddhist podcast. I've never listened to another podcast, actually. We're just being present for the joy and love of it. I learn from you. I learn from Sister TD when she's here, which is why it's so lovely to have. And as you say, that's enough. And that is the benefit to the world, is that if we generate joy inside of ourselves, it naturally flows into the world. Where if we're trying to create joy for people outside, that is much harder. So, Sister, if we're not searching outside, where should we be searching? Because here in the sutra it says, they live simply and peacefully so they can devote themselves to practicing the way. Sister, what is the way? And how do we, if we're not looking outside of ourselves, where should we be looking?
I'm glad we've got to this one, because I think this is one of the most memorable lines for me that really echoes often in my life. The human mind is always searching outside itself and never feels fulfilled. And that's a kind of in itself a practice for us, like to suddenly catch ourselves. Oh my goodness, my mind has gone searching in. That is the tendency of a human mind. And the alternative here we're being invited to is don't do that. Bodhisattvas know the value of, so few desires so we can live simply and peacefully. And as you say, so we can devote ourselves to practicing the way, the path here. It could equally be translated as the path. And for me, what this has meant for me is I've given up a lot to be able to invest in my monastic life, given up family, friends, intimate relationship, home country, and endless cups of tea.
I like the way you put the most important one last.
Yeah. So we give up a lot of things. And it's really interesting to realize that I didn't make this choice to be in the doing, to be doing something, to be searching outside myself. Actually, for me, this was a really intimate choice, that I want to take my inner spiritual life seriously so that in this lifetime, I can heal that which is there that needs to be healed, so that I don't betray myself by the time I'm on my deathbed and feel that I didn't live my life fully or do the work, inner work, that I have a chance to do in this lifetime. So for me, when I catch my mind searching outside myself to be fulfilled, I'm a creative person. I love projects. I love learning. But actually, I'm not here for projects and I'm not here for learning. Actually, I'm here for healing. I'm here to not betray myself. I'm here to look deeply, to understand the wounds I've inherited and the wounds from my lifetime. I'm here to make peace with my being at a really deep level. And so for me, the practicing the way here, devoting myself to practice the path, the way, is an inward path of to feel that I have known myself intimately, to feel that I have made peace with myself, to feel that every day is no longer a betrayal of who I want to be in the world and the gift of this body, this life, to heal that which I've received from my ancestors, which has its torments and its pains and its despair, to heal what I've experienced in my lifetime, the wrong paths I've taken, the wrong actions I've done. Like, can I make peace with all of that? So to practice the way, and technically in Buddhism, whenever we're saying the way, the path, we're talking about the Eightfold Noble Path that we speak about a lot in this podcast. We're also talking about really understanding the Four Noble Truths, the roots of suffering, the nature of our suffering, the roots of it, the path towards happiness, and the reality and possibility of happiness or healing. And so for me, that's the way that I'm in pursuit of. And that is then my ambition, my desire, my intention. Can I find deep peace and healing within myself in this lifetime. And we think a lifetime is a lot, but goodness, it goes fast. And I'm sure everyone listening feels that too. How long do we have? And we don't know how long do we have. So how are we living our days to be in deep, intimate relationship with ourselves? For example, a regular practice of sitting or walking, no screens, no phone, being with ourselves, being with our body and feelings, and investing the time and space and energy we need to listen to our heart, to the landscape of our feelings, to everything going on in our body, to be able to get through this forest of confusion of our mind and our body, to actually see clearly what is going on and to take care of it so that some of that deeper healing can take place. And that is why in these realizations later, it also includes the importance of kind of like diligence and training and to keep making space for our true practice of the path of understanding and love and healing for ourselves. And so this is really, I think, the koan for me when I reflect on my day or my week. Have I been truly in touch with myself deep inside? I may have realized a lot. I may have had some fun even. I may have touched joy and things. And healing can be taking place in those things. But am I really doing that deeper work of making peace with myself? And I think for each one of us, there's going to be a deeper path that is calling to us. And that voice may be quite quiet, but it will be there. Like really this very, very deep and intimate wish about ourselves in relation to our body and consciousness, these 5 skandhas, this river of inheritance that we've received from our ancestors and our society. How are we with that inheritance? And what are we transmitting into the world, not just through genetic continuation, but through our thoughts, our speech, and our action? And are we at peace with that part of things?
Beautiful, sister. Thank you. And I just want to acknowledge you both and the monastics here, actually. Because for a lot of people who lead busy lives, they're able to maybe spend 20 minutes meditation or bits of time here, or bits of time there. And I just want to acknowledge all the monastics here who have decided, as you said, to fundamentally change their life and devote their life for as long as they're here to this practice, because it is a refuge. And I always think of Plum Village as a sort of there's some pinpoints of light in the world, places that hold an energy that allow people to feel safe, that are places of literally of deep refuge. And that is because you're devoting that time. And I think, some people may mistake coming to Plum Village that they're coming to a practice center. They're coming to go on a retreat. But actually, I don't think people do come here to be on a retreat. I think people come here to be in the holding space that you hold. I think people come here to be in your embrace, which they do not get from going to a retreat center. And so I just want to acknowledge that, that by devoting this path to the inner understanding, you are creating the outer understanding. And I think people, and I was speaking to someone this morning about that, it's only when we develop the inner understanding that we can be generous with presenting that to the outside world, or that we're creating the feeling inside of us that people can then relate to and can connect to, and that you can transmit this teaching rather than just from an intellectual place, that people feel it here. So, for me, this sense of they can devote themselves to practicing the way, that what you do is an extraordinary gift. And I don't think a lot of people quite realize the scale of the gift you offer, actually. Brother Phap Huu, they regard the realization of perfect understanding to be their only career. So, brother, that's quite a tough gig, isn't it? As soon as you add a word like perfect understanding, I mean, I even put the realization of a vague partial understanding would be pretty cool.
That's our northern star. That's like the star that guides us, that we see it as a career, that we keep developing our understanding. So not to be too attached and too hard on oneself. But that we see that is the path that we are continuously walking towards.
But can you just talk a bit about people living busy lives? Because people believe success is, when they read that, they might say, oh, perfect understanding, I'm failing so badly, I'm hardly getting it. I'm realizing that sometimes we can use these words to self-flagellate, to actually attack ourselves. So I think we have to be quite careful, don't we, about how we use these words. And actually, as you say, it's a North Star, but I love that idea of Pema Chodron. The Buddha says, start where you are. That we shouldn't try to be perfect when we're imperfect. We should allow ourselves to be imperfect on the road to perfection.
Yeah, I think like for Gen Z, I would say understanding as your career. Take out the word perfect, because there's enough expectation in life and enough pressure in life. But understanding is something that we can generate every day. Understanding oneself, understanding that we are not perfect, and that is totally beautiful.
And imperfection is our perfection.
There we go.
Okay, let's go on to the fourth realization. So I'll read it. The fourth realization is the awareness that indolence is an obstacle to practice. You must practice diligently to transform unwholesome mental states that bind you, and you must conquer the 4 kinds of Mara in order to free yourself from the prisons of the 5 aggregates and the 3 worlds. So, sister, before we dive into this, would it be helpful to just help our listeners to understand what the 4 kinds of Mara and the 3 worlds are, or would you like to dive straight into the meaning? I think you're enjoying this one.
Well, what I love about Buddhism is Buddhism loves lists. We often say this. And we also love repetition. So there's actually some elements. So 4 kinds of Mara. Mara is sort of this mischievous or haunting image kind of in our consciousness, things that kind of may torment us or bedevil us, kind of things that are sort of getting in the way, kind of mischief-making entanglers. And the 4 Maras, the first is the Mara of afflictions. So we've already mentioned this, but this is the craving, the anger, the despair, all of these kind of things that cloud the mind, that lead to this mind of confusion. And the second kind of Mara is it's an attachment to ourself, to our, what we call these 5 aggregates, our body, our feelings, our perceptions, our mental formations, and our consciousness. This list of 5, which is very important in being able to break down this sense of self into some composite parts and to see them as rivers. And so that's the second kind of Mara, thinking that we're a self and that this body and everything that we're feeling and thinking is a self. And then the third kind of Mara is actually clinging to our life, our lifespan, and then fearing death. So fearing that we will suddenly not exist. And that fear can drive us very kind of silently in our life. And that's why contemplating impermanence and continuation is such an important key. And then the fourth kind of Mara is basically all of the worldly cravings. So whether it's fame, power, success, or so on. And these are all things that lure us away from our meditation and spiritual practice. As we've just been saying, there are things that we think are important, but they're actually not really important. And they're taking our time and energy from a deep kind of pursuit of something inside that can really unlock understanding of suffering, can really unlock insight and help us live a more deeply meaningful and healing and loving life. So these are the kind of 4 kinds of Mara. So our afflictions, identifying with our body, our fear of death, and then being caught up in these cravings. And so the language here is so powerful. You must conquer the 4 kinds of Mara in order to free yourself from the prisons of the 5 aggregates, prison of clinging to yourself. So it's very strong language, but it's setting a good mission. This is your mission, should you choose to accept it. Yeah. And another prison that it mentions here is the kind of prison of the 3 worlds. And just to understand that quite simply, it's these things that kind of can capture us, which is, of course, all the desire and craving. That's one of the realms. A second is our attachment to form, whether it's our form or others' form or even the form of the world. And third, like attachment to the formless world or the world of our perceptions and getting caught and entangled in, believing that what we're seeing in our mind or perceptions might be real or not, and then trying to also attain certain states. So all of that kind of craving and grasping in all these different aspects can be understood as the 3 worlds here.
I imagine that's why we have to practice diligently, because that is a lot to take on for anybody. I mean, the sort of the 4 kinds of Mara, the 5 aggregates, and the 3 worlds. I mean, what I think the realization is showing is that we can't just sit back and be lazy and occasionally look at this. That actually this needs constant attention, as you're referring to the garden before, that if you leave the garden alone, then the weeds will grow. So talk to us a little bit about what indolence means in this context, and what does it mean to practice diligently?
So I think it means that there is a task, there is a mission, there is a way through the forest of confusion, there is a way to cultivate the garden of our hearts and minds and being. And all of us know those, whether it's houseplants or your back garden left unattended, what happens to it. So there is a kind of active nurturing, caring, and cultivating for us to do in our spiritual life, because as humans, as a species, when left untended, when left abandoned, we will go down into all of these various holes, some of them we've mentioned already. We will be dragged under by everything that the world, the market is pulling us into. We'll be dragged into the screens. We'll be dragged into so much kind of content that can water seeds of craving, fear, anxiety, hatred, anger, despair. We will get dragged under by all of these things in our relationships, in our struggles at work, in our struggles to try to transform our society. All of these things, we can let them eat us up. And here is saying, as a practitioner, be diligent. And this is a lovely set of lists. It's a very full set of lists. But basically, the main point here is guard your mind and feed your mind good things. And apply effort every day, every week. What have I been feeding my mind? What have I been allowing to sweep me away? How have I been acting on my cravings this week? How have I been allowing myself to be pulled into the screen this week? How have I allowed myself to be swept away with, for example, the tragedies on the news? What is that? Where is that taking my mind? And this is really important, because we are the 8 realizations are acknowledging that the suffering in the world is real. But where our freedom, our agency, and our free will as practitioner comes in is, how do we respond to it? So it's a training to see how we respond, for example, to the news, how we set up our habits with the screens, how we set up our intention for how we want to relate to our colleagues or our project. It's a training, it's a North Star, and then it'll take some effort to get to where we would like to go. So, like, for example, for me, one of my values coming into the monastery was I wanted to relate to news with my heart open, because having worked in the newsroom, I became so numb. And I didn't want that to be part of my life. I wanted time to acknowledge sad news. And so that's been so interesting for me when I read heartbreaking news, sad news, whether it's about the natural world or human disasters and violent conflict and injustice and oppression. I now give myself more space. At the beginning, it was really interesting. I read the news by just reading the headlines and not actually clicking, because I knew what the story would say, and I just needed time to be with the headline itself. And for me, that means I put my hand on my heart, I breathe, I look out of the window, and a bit like the first realization, there is impermanence, and we'll come to another realization. The fire of birth and death is raging. Like, this is something we are bearing witness to as humans on this planet. And simply how I consume and take that in is a cultivation of the mind. So I don't want to have a lazy mind, an indolent mind when I'm reading the news. It's not that the news is happening to me, right? Meaning I'm not letting it happen in an unguarded way. I am intentional. How am I going to read the news? And when I've read that headline or read that article, sometimes I read the first paragraph and I say to myself, I don't need to read the rest. I now know, and it might be too much for me in that moment, or I just need more space to be with it. So this is a way of like cultivating the mind. When we wake up and we know we have a difficult day ahead of ourselves, right? How do we prepare to meet that day with freedom, with stability, with compassion, with understanding? And in our kind of Buddhism, we're really talking it's a lot about the energy we bring to things, the space we create around things. We may still do the same action, but by creating space, that's where we find the freedom, and we can choose to do it in a different way. So you must practice diligently to transform the unwholesome mental states that bind you. Anytime we start a walking meditation or a sitting meditation, we sit down and we are confronted with, what is my mental state right now? And that mental state, we can name it. That's already the first step. Okay, my mental state is sorrow, is grief and sadness. My mental state is agitation, frustration, resentment, and rage. We just name it. That is step one of freeing ourselves, not letting that mental state bind us. So we name it. And for me, I mean, I don't know how anyone else's autumn, but for me this autumn, my mental states have been a torrent of a whole load of things. And it's been quite something in sitting meditation to be like, wow, that actually is the landscape of my mind right now. Coming back to my breathing, to my body. How is that mental state manifesting in my body? So we come back then to this element of my 5 aggregates. Where is it showing up? I've got it in my feelings. How is it showing up in coloring my mind and perceptions? How is it showing up in the tension in the body that I can now release? So this is an active cultivation, and basically something ideally we can take care of and tend to every day when we're doing the dishes. How can we check in with our body as we're doing the dishes? You know, that rushing, that resentment, that rage, that frustration is going to come into the dishes. So washing the dishes in freedom is a way to free us from this mental state that binds us. So this kind of active energy in paying attention to what is our mental state, being able to name it, to create some space, and then like using our energy of mindfulness, using our intention. It's like, I am more than this. See, you have to activate the insight of into being and non-self. This is not me. This feeling is not me. I can create some space. This is my life. This moment of dishwashing is my life. It is happening right now with this cup, this bowl, this spoon. How can I set myself free in this moment to touch life in all its mystery and wonder, in the spoon, in the bowl, in the cup? So it's like there is a constant cultivation going on throughout the day to recognize our mental state, to acknowledge it. And then there's kind of 2 pathways. One, set ourselves free. Like for me, I declare myself to be a free person when doing the dishes. So for me, I'm not looking deeply into my despair when I'm doing the dishes, but I'm setting myself free. That's because somehow I never feel free when I do the dishes. So I cultivate feeling free and feeling connected to the cosmos. And that really works for me as a door to unlock that moment. But I do look deeply into these stronger feelings when I'm doing walking meditation and when I'm on the cushion. And that's a daily practice to understand the layers in all these different mental states that can kind of entangle and bind us.
Thank you, sister. And one question that was just coming up in my mind as you were talking is some people have a bit of an obsessive quality to them. How do we guard ourselves around the diligence becoming obsessional? That if we're thinking about something all day or aware of something all day, that for some people that might sort of spin off into losing connection with life as well. How do we, it's a very general question, but how do we be diligent but not obsessive?
So this is a very interesting question about the tendency of the mind. So one of the problems in the mind is that we have a low-level background noise of a certain feeling or mental state, like fear, agitation, despair, sadness, grief, that we're not paying attention to. And so something super important is to create space to have moments to then listen to those background things that we're not paying attention to and let them come fully to the fore. It would be wonderful if we're feeling super diligent all day long and, applying the screw really tight and like keeping guard on our mind from dawn till dusk. I don't know how many people could actually do that. Sometimes we see it. Well, sometimes we see it, especially at the beginning of the Rains Retreat, everyone's super determined to be able to make good use of these 90 days. And sometimes there can be that tightness in the first week or two of our 90-day retreat. But really, I think you're touching on something here, Jo, which is actually the kind of quality of attentiveness to the mind in our tradition. We have these images of, conquer and sort of strike down with your sword, cut yourself free. And some of these sort of warrior images are really powerful to be able to reclaim our freedom or to penetrate some things that are haunting us. But for most of the time, I think it's love and compassion and non-judgment that's needed to our kind of inner world, and simply what we call mere recognition. So this diligence is not a tight, tough diligence like, no, this kind of thought, you're not allowed, that you're not allowed, and to push down or repress the despair we may be feeling about the world right now. Actually, it's counterintuitive, but it's by creating space and acknowledgement and welcoming, as Rumi would say, welcome all these feelings into the guest house. Like really welcome everything in with non-judgment, compassion, and care. That allows then these things that are sort of driving us silently to be able to be something we can look deeply with our meditation. And so actually it's a lot about time and place, like I mentioned. Like there are some practices to do at certain places in the day. Like please, when you're in the shower, cherish your body, feel alive. This is a body, it's traveled through millions of years to be here and alive now, and I'm going to enjoy every single toe. That is the task in the shower, right? When you're doing the dishes, the task is to also feel free, right? And then when you're in walking meditation or sitting, that can be a time for deeper looking. But to not think that every moment of the day has to be somehow controlling, guarding, or like managing your mind. When we say that we observe what is happening in the mind, this mere recognition is already a power, because we're saying, I am more than this thing. You're sitting on the bus or the train or in a traffic jam in your car, and you realize, wow, you feel your knuckles are white on the steering wheel. Wow, there is tension in my body. Wow. And then to just get curious, why am I so tense this morning or this evening? What happened today that my body is feeling tense? And to kind of, take those moments to go in, but simply by recognizing, tension is there, that is already a huge part of it.
Okay, thank you. Brother, just before we move on, I just want to come back to Sister's talking about sort of, in a sense, mindful consumption, because I know when I came to Plum Village for the first time, I always thought of mindful consumption as sort of what I eat. And what I've learned over the years is, mindful consumption is we're consuming all the time. So it's not just that we are sort of looking outside, but so much is coming towards us. Can you just, for the benefit of our listeners, just say what do we mean by mindful consumption on a much broader level?
I think in a much broader level, it is to understand that our what we see is consuming, what we hear, what we smell, what we taste, and the collective consciousness, like the environment we are in, that is also consumption. So those are all foods that will penetrate the mind and will create perceptions, thoughts, and ideas, and so on. So all of these, as a practitioner, we want to learn to guard and say, no, I actually don't need to watch this. I actually don't need to cover my free time with these entertainment, because time is also to learn to be alive, learn to be in touch with. And that's where, like, what Sister True Dedication was saying is like how the fundamental and the most advanced practices is actually enjoying the most simplest actions in our daily life, like such as walking. I love cleaning. I love cleaning the room, but it's it's very pleasing, and I feel very satisfied. And sometimes when when I'm overwhelmed with emotions and I feel very restless, I need to direct my energy towards a task, because if I allow myself just to sit, that restlessness continues to be built. So that is also a way of consuming your own thinking, your own energy. So here, what we're learning in our meditation practice and in the life of a community is seeing that daily life can be wonderful holder of spaces, like a task of cleaning. So I recently bought a vacuum cleaner for the monks' zendo, which is our little meditation hall, and which is like partly meditation hall, partly meeting room, partly workout room. So a lot of thing happens in that space, and whenever I get so overwhelmed, I just start vacuuming the zendo, and I feel so at ease, because that becomes my meditation hall, and nobody can remove my freedom in that moment of cleaning the hall. So for me, it's like our actions are also our way of consuming, our way of cultivating, our way of directing our energy. And that's why, like, the training in our beginning of our life is to have a schedule, is to be disciplined, is to learn to also not become I dare say a slave towards our habits, and push ourselves a little bit also, because if we continue to give in, we will never be able to build new habits. So, for example, this is my new habit, one of the habits that I've actually had for a long time, but I've invited it into my my daily life, because now a lot of meetings, so I like very concrete things I get to see done in an instant.
So, brother, you're very welcome to come round to our house anytime and vacuum our house. And Sister True Dedication, I'm sure the Lower Hamlet sisters would welcome Phap Huu coming to vacuum. I don't know if that's true or not, but I think there are plenty of places around here.
We're short of vacuums in the monastery. It's true, because we're always so busy with brooms. So
and we're moving the vacuum cleaners all around the so many buildings that we have. Isn't that true?
It's so true. You can never find a vacuum cleaner. There's at least one for the cars, but you're always looking for it.
You see?
It could be a new business, Zen Cleaners.
Zen Cleaners.
It would be a picture of posters around this area of Phap Huu with a vacuum cleaner.
No, but in a more serious note, right? This one, I think this realization is really talking about right effort. Mm-hmm. And that's an art. what can we do? What would lift our spirits? What would help us embrace the depths of what's going on in us at that moment? And just every hour, actually, how we are using our time, how we're spending our energy, how we are relating to ourselves. We can kind of choose a way of being with our mind, our habits, and our energies in order to take care of the suffering and in order to nurture the happiness. So this realization is all about right effort.
So, dear listeners, we're finding that as we go deep into this practice, of course, we are taking the time and space to look at them deeply and not to rush. So time has moved on. It hasn't felt swift, but it's moved on swiftly.
Time is time, Jo.
Time is time. Time is time. Many ways of seeing time, though, of course, but that's another podcast. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop here. And we always thought that this may be, with the 8 realizations, it may need more time and space than one episode on its own. So I think we're going to stop here and continue because actually there's no rush. This is the work of a lifetime, so why try and cram it in? And also, it's a chance for Phap Huu and Sister True Dedication to relax and also bring fresh energy when they next come. So, thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there are plenty more, probably about 170 hours that you can listen to us. Poor you. So if you enjoyed it, you can find all of our other episodes on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, or other platforms that carry podcasts.
And this podcast was brought to you with the collaboration of Global Optimism and the Plum Village app with the support from the Thich Nhat Hanh Foundation. If you feel inspired to support the podcast moving forward, please visit www.tnhf.org/donate. And we would like to thank our friends and collaborator, Clay, aka the Podfather, our co-producer, and Kata, our co-producer, our other friend Jo, our audio editing, Anka, our show notes and publishing, and Jasmine and Cindy, our social media guardian angels, and today Georgine on the sound and tech.
And Sister True Dedication, thank you for taking the time and being present and for sharing deeply from the heart.
Thank you both. I always love sharing with you and being in your company. You're good spiritual friends.
The way out is in.